Considered this for a while, but it's time for the heart of the cards to meet the heart of the stories. Welcome to the heart of the stories we tell. My name is Rob, and tonight I will be reviewing Yu-Gi-Oh!, the series that aired on Kids for Kids, and also the Japanese anime, although they're a little different than each other. They're all based on the idea of this magic called the Millennium Pieces, the Millennium Items, and each of those are artifacts from an ancient time in Egypt. In fact, the story has more in common with a Cthulhu horror story than most stories having to do with kids. But before we talk about cults and ancient magic and monsters hidden in other worlds, I think it's only fair to say that the Kids for Kids version was very edited, and because of that, there are some things I understand why they didn't, some they didn't. They took the words off just about everything. Okay, maybe that's a bit advanced of a book. They were so concerned with taking out the violence that they decided that even violence against fish was a problem, so they edited out that the fisherman catches and eats fish. Now, I understand Porky's is a ways away from this sort of thing, but it was just a joke when they were looking in the women's shower room, and Yugi, the main character, wasn't even for it, so I'm not even sure that was sexual. Now, the sexual stuff and the putting more clothes on, I understand why they did that for the kids. But the star, they had to cover the star with a different, because a star was too much, and they took away the bathroom humor. I mean, come on. They they thought the "where's the bathroom? No girls can't pee off the side of the boat" was too out there. I mean, you'd think potty humor would be exactly what they'd want for kids. And of course, the most famous editing that they do on kids' cartoons, no guns, because kids hate playing with toy guns, and having violence is perfectly fine as long as it's not gun violence, because a whole generation turned into serial killers because of G.I. Joe, right? So yeah, I can understand why a lot of people say the story has a lot of kids' beats in it, and why the American version especially had a bunch of things that were very childish. But at the end of the day, none of that really matters, because it still has a pretty powerful story that's based, again, a lot in the Cthulhu mythos and the idea of ancient cults, ancient power, hidden bloodline, and of course, the most important thing in a fantasy story, the idea of empowerment. You're the secret hero of the whole world. Overall, the story itself, while childish, does have a lot to its base, and so I'd give it a great silver. Not the best of stories, but far from the worst. I guess I'm going to throw up the spoiler alert because I'm going to be talking about the story in detail, well, somewhat detail. So, if you don't know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh!, you're about to learn, or be spoiled depending on how you look at it. At its base, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is about a card game. A game where the main character plays. However, the card game is based on ancient magic and has hidden stuff in it. For instance, the main character has a spirit guide in the form of Karibo, and even by accident, his friends create magical effects, like when they have the friendship symbol that helps him out because it empowers the magic of the Millennium piece he has. The monsters and characters that are represented in the game are all things that were powerful Egyptian monsters or spellcasters. Okay, so where did this all come from? Let's go back to the beginning of the story, even though that's the end of the series. And the story truly begins in Egypt, and well, a magical fantasy version of Egypt, with the formation of the Millennium Pieces. And those Millennium items come from the spell that was found in the Millennium Book. Yeah, I know, not very creative naming choices. The Millennium Spell Book held dark, secret, ancient magic. Sound familiar? Kind of like that Necronomicon we talked about back in the Lovecraft videos? Well, they use them to make these items, and it's a pretty messed up story. Each of the items has its own unique powers, and each one has a way of tying in with the others, but at the end of the day, they are basically dark magic foci that allow the wielder to manipulate certain parts of reality. Some are mind control, some are mind reading, some can see the future. The Millennium Puzzle can manipulate odds and luck, and, well, just about anything else the plot calls for. And all of them come from this sarcophagus where they were crafted. And to be honest, that's where the story goes super dark. The story of Kal Elnor, the city where the pharaoh's brother sacrificed 100 citizens, and the soldiers used their blood to temper the metal and their souls to power it. This guy right here, one badass evil necromancer, but he was supposed to be one of the good guys. See, the whole thing is he was trying to make a weapon for the Pharaoh to defend against greater evil. And we all know the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions. See, here's the problem. The enemy he was facing, that greater evil he was worried about, was an invading army. You know, like a normal everyday invading army. And what happened was he created these magical artifacts in order to fight them, because they were slaughtering his people. But remember that origin story I told you up above? To save 1,000,000, would you kill 100? To save 1,000,000,000, would you kill 1,000? Well, his answer was yes. And you have to remember, these weren't just monsters, these weren't cards, these were people. And, of course, 4Kids didn't edit that out, because, well, it wasn't guns. So that magic item, the thing that gives Yugioh all his power, comes from a story about... So that magic item, the thing that gives Yugioh all his power, comes from a story about someone who slaughtered an entire town, melted them down, turned them into magic items. Oh, and in the process, accidentally released an ancient evil. Because, of course, that's what happens. But you know how badass he is? To fight him, he plucked out his own eye. Tell me that's not Cthulhu-esque. I can practically imagine Lovecraft writing it now. Ancient cult, magic powers, demons beyond the realm into another dimension, rip out your own eye in order to fight it. Of course, as cliche as it is, he keeps the origin of those powers a secret, and then the king uses them, and he gives them to his best disciples. With the magic of the Millennium items, they call forth the creatures from another dimension, including the gods themselves, and they win the war. Of course, winning the war loses them everything. To quote Lord of the Rings, as time passed, myth became legend, legend became forgotten, and some things just became unknown. And as such, the magic went into hiding, and there was none, until a bunch of archaeologists dug it up. Now, that's not really important. The important part is that the Millennium Puzzle itself contained the soul of the son of that pharaoh. With magic returning to the world, once again that pharaoh was needed, and that is where the story really starts. This ancient Roman artifact, the Millennium Puzzle, held within it the soul of the pharaoh, and with it true power. And when Yugimoto, his reincarnation, completes the puzzle, the soul is allowed to fully merge, and we get Yami Yugi, which is the combined pharaoh and modern-day Yugi. And they are badass and can access all this power and magic. The problem is, the pharaoh's lost his memory. He doesn't remember who he really is. He has the power, but he's not 100% sure on how to use it. And of course he's being guided by a small child. Now, this is where I just want to go into one of the most ridiculous things in the story. When fully merged as Yami Yugi, he gains almost a foot in height. He obviously broadens out and becomes much older. And you know how that's described in the anime? He gets this look in his eye. Dude, his voice dropped an octave, for God's sake. That's not a look in your eye. Of course, that might just be for the audience's sake. But I still say that it has more in common with Captain Marvel Shazam changing than it does with Superman taking off his Clark Kent glasses. Sorry, sidetrack over. Of course, Yugi runs into other people who have the Millennium items. Some of them are enemies, some of them are friends. Well, most of them are enemies, because, of course, we need people that can compete with him. And yeah, at first, it's just all about a card game, and they play the card game over and over again, but more and more the card game takes on a fact that the magic is real. They're really summoning these creatures, and these creatures can do real lasting harm in the real world. Not only would I draw parallels to Cthulhu, but to King Arthur, the once and future king. Well, in this case, the king of games is really an ancient pharaoh who doesn't remember his past, who has these magical powers that are evil and necromantic in nature, and he has to use them to stop other evil people. And even cheesy things like the power of friendship, powered by that Millennium Puzzle and that ancient pharaoh's spirit, take on a whole new meaning, as they can actually come to each other's aid and save each other's lives. And I'm not kidding when I say saving lives, because you remember, they can't have guns because that type of violence is wrong, but this guy here, Maximilian Pegasus, can rip your soul out with his magic eye. And you know where he puts that soul? Inside a playing card. Yeah, because that's not a fate worse than death, being trapped forever in a playing card. But you wouldn't want to get shot or something. However, there are still those that remember the old ways, those that know about this ancient magic, because of course, like any Cthulhu story, we have to have our mystic cultists. And in this case, we have Egyptian cultists. Well, we have like two sets, because we have the grave robbers and the grave keepers, and Sade is the one that we run into first, who knows all of these things and how to work the Millennium items, and actually has a couple of them on his person when we first run into him with Pegasus. However, Sade isn't even a villain. Sade's there to help more often than not. Of course, his counterpart is Merrick. Merrick, on the other hand, also is part of a family line of powerful sorcerers who have traveled throughout history and who know all about the Pharaoh and the ancient Shadow games and the power of the Shadow Realm. And you know what? He's a bastard. He's been corrupted by the spirits of the Millennium items, and he wants to do his own thing, and no longer wants to protect, he wants to kill. He has the power to do it too because of his Millennium Rod and the rare hunters, and the fact that he actually knows real magic because it's carved into his back. However, he also holds two of the three Egyptian gods, because the souls that were once held in stone tablets are now held in these cards, and Pegasus was dumb enough to actually print god cards. Of course, being a kids' TV show, he gets defeated too. Is that a spoiler alert that the bad guy loses at the end of the show? I mean, that's every show, right? Well, most shows. So they do keep the card game analogy running quite through the whole thing, but it's a shadow game, a duel of wizards, and eventually Yugi reclaims all the Millennium items and unlocks the Pharaoh's memories. But let's not forget something. That book that created those Millennium items didn't belong to the Egyptian that was his uncle and his father. It was written long ago even then. It was written in the time before that, when there were other darker creatures, and as such we have an entire season where he has to fight Atlantean super monsters, and create a monster whose attack power is equal to infinite plus one. I wish I could say I was making that up. The original story is obviously based on several real-life myths, and was dumbed down a couple of times over with edits, especially with the 4Kids stuff taking out some things. But at the end of the day, it's not a bad story. It's a very interesting one, and one that I liked getting to the heart of. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the story of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the story of the Pharaoh, the dark magic, and the kid who's caught up in all of it. I'm also going to ask you to like and share this video, and then give me a subscribe so that we can build a community, and then I can walk with you through the heart of the stories we tell. Every week I do one of these videos that touches on different things that I think about, plus I review a bunch of TV shows, and all the major geeky movies. For now, I'd like to thank you for watching. Have a good night.